Well, if you are dialed in to hear from T360 about the Swanepoel Trends Report and the post-settlement chapter that we are writing for our Trends Report for the 2025 edition, you're in the right place. I see we've got people coming into the meeting right now. So those of you that are new to this, my name is Jack Miller. I'm the president and CEO of T360. And I have here with me Paul Hagey, who is our editor-in-chief of the Swanepoel Trends Report and the Real Estate Almanac and all of our other publications. And we are now kicking off a little bit of our preview series for the 2025 Swanepoel Trends Report. This report is now, this will be its 20th edition. So that is a lot of analysis of the industry, and we're hoping to do something special with this year's report and provide some real practical, hands-on, useful things to real estate industry leaders, as those of you that are familiar with the report are accustomed to. So, I see we're still getting a few more people coming on. I know we have this streaming over to LinkedIn. This report has some really interesting things because of the recent practice changes have just happened a week ago. We're 10 days in.
Yeah, we're 10 days.
Yeah, so it's like right now. And so we are as curious with our audience as to what you guys are seeing. And so we're going to have some polling in just a minute or two here with that. But I'm gonna kick it over to Paul to kind of set up the conversation for today, what we're going to talk about, how we're going to approach it, and then we'll jump right in.
Great. And Jack, you've been on the front lines of this, of digesting the practice changes and the practical implications that leaders are going to have to confront, brokerages and also agents themselves. And I should add that the report is coming out digitally in early November. It comes out in print in December. So we're hard at work, and we're in the middle of this chapter on the post-settlement strategies and practices. So excited to work with you on that. There's a lot happening. 10 days in. So Jack, you've been talking about this a lot. We've held some workshops. You've led some workshops in person. You've talked, I think you just talked last week, gave a presentation. What are you hearing from the people in the audience, and what are your conversations like and the feedback you've been receiving from some of the presentations you've been giving?
Yeah, so a little context. We've done 2 in-person live workshops with brokers. So we've had about 75 brokerages come through those workshops in the last 6 weeks, all working on post-settlement practices. And then I've also spoken this summer. I think I've done 4 or 5 speaking engagements on this topic with tons of questions coming in. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of practical, pragmatic, how do I navigate particular situations, and that's the nature of what we're hearing, and that's kind of a very nice segue. Some questions.
What I like about how you've been framing it, it's like the old way, the new way, and you almost take it the end game of where does this end up, and then establishing strategies and practices that kind of get around all the in between, which is a really, when I know I've been in some of the audiences, it's just there's some clarity there. So, so you've been giving it. What have you been hearing?
Well, I want to hear from this audience first, Paul. So we've queued up some questions to ask this group, because this is usually the people who are showing up on this are some of our people who've been following us for a while. So I've got some questions for the group. So if you're on the Zoom right now, if you're on the LinkedIn, you can just watch. But if you're on the Zoom, you should have a question in front of you right now about what's happening post-settlement for you. So I'll read through. These are the questions. Since August 17th, transactions that either you or your brokerage have participated in have, and we've got 3 options there: utilize broker-to-broker compensation for buyer agent compensation, utilized a seller concession for buyer agent compensation, or used a mix of both. So that's question 1. I'm interested to see what's actually happening out in the real world. Second question is, our brokerage or myself personally are primarily offering broker-to-broker buyer agent compensation, primarily offering a seller concession on our listings, or offering a mix of these depending on the client or the agent. So that's the second question. Third question is, our listing conversations about commissions are now basically the same, kind of business as usual, more difficult or easier? Curious as to what this group thinks. And then the last question I have for the group is, either your brokerage or yourself personally, Are you securing buyer agreements easily, securing buyer agreements with some challenges, or having significant challenges securing buyer agreements? So again, I'll give you guys another 45 seconds here to answer these questions in the poll, and then we'll share these back out. I'll also say we are intending to send out a larger survey to our entire database to capture a little bit more of what's happening in the market right now. I think it's really the real question. And this came, Paul, from the workshops. A lot of these really have hit on the pragmatics of, do we offer, broker to broker compensation? Do we tell people like, hey, write it into your offer, we'll have a seller concession back to you. What are the pragmatics of that? And there's a lot of other questions I want to ask too. I just didn't want to do like, how are you marketing? Are you marketing seller concessions or broker to broker offers of compensation? These are all good questions. So we'll leave the poll up for just a minute, and then I'll dive into some of the other things I'm hearing in the workshop. There are interpretations, Paul, that I think most brokers are having to wrestle with regard to agency law in their state.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you some examples. One of our workshops was in Colorado. The state of Colorado their state has said, hey, agency law doesn't require that you sign an agreement up front. So there's a little bit of a shootout between what the NAR is saying, hey, you need to sign an agreement to go look at a home if you're viewing an MLS listed property that's with a realtor or an NAR affiliate. And the state is saying, hey, no, you don't. You don't have to do that. So there's a little confusion to the consumer. So I've seen that. There's also a tremendous number of brokers that I've seen that have agents that they're just determined to do it the old way. They're determined to call in advance, find out if there's broker to broker compensation, find out what that is. And even though it potentially creates some conflict with their client, it can be something where they've signed an agreement for, one percentage or rate, and then they find out something different is being potentially offered or available. Even if it's spoken over the phone, it's not, it's not in writing. And then they're having to true up the difference. And so I'm seeing a lot of people saying, hey, I signed my client for this. They're offering that. Can I go get more compensation? Do I need to renegotiate with my buyer? And so I've definitely seen some confusion.
Part of the simplicity I've seen in some of your presentations is like, put it in the offer.
Yeah.
Like when negotiation, because it's all marketing until you get it
Until it's in writing.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and wrap up the poll and see how we did. So I think our good friend Chris Riley is operating all of our poll mechanics, and let's see what the group had to say about what's happening. So Chris, you can go ahead and do that. Let's share back the results. So okay, so here's what we've got. You should be seeing, if you're on the Zoom, and I'll speak this for those who are on the LinkedIn Live, since August 17th. So we're seeing 44% of our respondents are primarily using broker to broker compensation for buyer agent compensation. 35% are utilizing a seller concession for back, and 21% are using a mix of both. So the majority, there's a majority that has stepped into some level of seller concessions, but we still have a simple majority of broker compensation at 44%. That's still, which is not surprising, Paul. We just switched over, so I think a lot of that's probably going to stay the way it was, and it may stay that way for a while. All right. So second question, our brokerage or myself personally are primarily offering broker buyer agent compensation. That's 35%, seller concessions 25%, and 40% a mix of both. So we're doing a little bit of both is the top category here. So but still probably more prevalent in the broker compensation. Third choice, listing conversations about commissions now. 64% of you said basically the same. So 2/3 says, hey, it's not really that much different, which makes sense. Nothing changed on the buyer side. I've been saying this at our workshops. Because of these new rules, buyers all of a sudden did not get $15,000 or $20,000 in their pocket to spend. So sellers that want to actually be able to sell their property probably do need to build that cost into the transaction. So 23% said difficult, 13% said easier. I'd love to hear from the easier folks about what makes it easy. Great. And then our brokerage or myself personally, about securing buyer agreements. So 24%, no problem. I know there's a lot of people,
Mm,
Paul, that's the other thing I've discovered in running these
mm,
workshops nationally. There's some states that are used to buyer agreements, and those people are like, hey, this is no big deal. It's no problem.
mm, mm-hmm.
71% said securing buyer agreements with some challenges. So that's pretty big. So if we're having 7 of 10 saying, hey, it's got a little more challenging to explain this to the buyers,
Which
that's
makes a lot of sense
it does.
because you got to go at the front end, and
Yeah.
you have to get some agreements
Yeah.
that we're not necessarily used to
Yeah,
right
and
away.
then this one's good. Having significant challenges only at 5%. That's not too bad. That's not too bad. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
so great. So thank you for
So we're
participating.
10 days in. I would
Yeah, and
love to see this 6 months in. We can compare maybe.
yeah. So one of the key issues, Paul, I'm seeing that is being debated both online and with brokers that have been in the room with us is how the negotiation process works now. Whether or not do you put compensation up front or say, hey, concessions are available up front, here's what it is. And buyers agents feeling like, well, I have to call, I have to find out. It's my fiduciary duty to know whether or not something's being offered or not. So that's been
Hmm.
probably one of the biggest debates is about what to do around that, since we've now lost the ability to put that in the MLS and have it as a binding blanket offer of compensation. That's gone away. I think that's probably one of the largest things is how does this impact negotiation strategy?
Mm, mm. And I know you're also uh, evaluating kind of the strategies on the listing side of how to consider how to market any concessions available, depending on the type of market you're in, and the demand. And I think that's really interesting. That's one of the parts we're pulling the thread on in the chapter of giving people like what are the conditions under which how you strategize of how when to offer, how much to offer, how to communicate it
Yeah,
to them.
I think this is an unexpected side effect in that the discussion around the offering of concessions or compensation is now much more dynamic. We've lived in a
Yeah.
system where just pretty much everybody did it the same way. And granted, sellers were never obligated to offer anything. There were many places where people would put $1 or zero, but it was less frequent. For the most part, most agents were listing property with some form of offer of compensation in the MLS. That was a prevalent practice, and people understood what that meant. But now that we're moving into this era where it's like, do we offer up front? Are we a big conversation is, are we disadvantaging our seller by letting people know that we're willing to, compensate or willing
Hmm.
to add some concessions? Are we tipping our hand too much?
Hmm.
Do we need to tip our hand because we work with buyers that really need it and need to know that it's there on the front end, right? So it's interesting. It's made that question very dynamic. We've come up with really 5 different questions to ask, sort of as a heuristic about this, about whether or not you discuss concessions or buyer agent compensation, whether or not you market it. And so these are the 5 that we've come up with. One is, are you in a buyer or a seller controlled market? Where are you? If you're in a buyer's market, meaning there are fewer buyers than there are sellers, meaning the buyers have a little bit more control because there's so few of them, and that's where many of our markets have shifted to. Then offering a concession or buyer agent compensation, something that says, hey, there's some incentives here for this particular property, maybe to your advantage as a seller. Say, look, if I want to sell my property and I'm in a buyer's market, I know I've got to attract the buyers and say, hey, there's some additional concessions in this transaction if I get a full priced offer, right? In a seller's market, it kind of swings the other way, where you go, well, you're in a seller's market and the sellers are in control, then your negotiation strategy may be better to say, hey, I'm not offering anything, but ask for what you need. And we'll evaluate all the offers and pick the one that works. So that's one, that's the buyer seller market. The second, which is, I think, correlated somewhat, is interest rates. I think the interest rates,
Mm.
being in a really high interest rate market, that means your buyers are under more financial pressure. And so it may be better or more, you may be helping your transaction more on the listing side and say, hey, we have some concessions available. We know that interest rates are placing a lot of financial pressure on the buyers for this house. So that's the second, is interest rate. The third, and I think this one's really important, the demographics of your potential buyers, Paul. And this one is interesting because it'll cut across all markets. So if you're selling an entry level property, or you're selling in a VA market like Fort Cavazos up the road here in Texas, where it's mostly military. Well, we know most of them are purchasing at below national median average home prices, and they don't have a lot of cash. And the premise of at least the VA program is you need very little down. And same with FHA and other loan programs. So the demographic of the buyer for your property, that's part of the conversation now, to say, okay, do we need to let people know, because of the demographic, that there's concessions available to make the transaction more manageable. Now, if you're selling a luxury property or above median home price property, maybe you don't need to, because you're dealing with people that are move up buyers, already have plenty of money to pay their agent or worked out a deal with their agent. So that's the third, is the demographics. The fourth is seller's motivation. Are you working with a seller that is more focused on top dollar and getting the best possible offer, or is your seller in a hurry? Right? Does your seller want to get a deal done quickly? Says, look, I got to move.
Agents are very familiar with this. With that one.
Yeah. It's a motivated seller. If it's a motivated seller, then you may want to consider marketing a seller concession or buyer agent compensation and say, look, there's some additional money in the transaction so that you attract more buyers, right? So that's the fourth. And then the fifth, and this one I didn't know how to capture this, but we're so early, we're 10 days in. Some people a little longer because they started a little earlier, but market practices. Is it in your market? Like, your market may land on a particular set of practices where it's just like, hey, this is just how we do it here. And that may be an influencing factor. Now, not all of those, I think, have to line up. You could be in a seller's market and working, but you're selling, VA, FHA, qualified type properties or low income properties. You say, look, I know it's a seller's market, but because of the property types we're dealing with these kinds of customers, we're going to market that there's seller concessions up front. So it's just a little more, so that's a little more nuance to that conversation about how to work with that. So that's one.
What I love about these is like, these are refined, and this is kind of what we're going to get in the chapter and go even deeper. These are battle tested, and we're kind of distilling down what are the key things we need to think about to operate at maximum ability in this new regime that we have.
Yeah,
and it's kind of a playbook of sorts.
Yeah, it is a playbook. And one of the things I've been saying, it's in my in every presentation I've done, whoever's better at explaining the new landscape and how things work simply is going to win over somebody that's not as good as explaining it. And so I have to
say, after seeing your presentation multiple times, I think you nailed the simplicity and the way to explain it and understand it and digest it and understand the essential elements and how you want to explain it in your own way, depending on your model and market.
Yeah. And so that's part of what I'm hoping we accomplish with this chapter, Paul, is to bring that kind of a playbook that is straightforward, that any brokerage can use, that isn't, I know there's some dogmatic thinking about this out there, and I fully appreciate that there's people saying, look, you have to always offer, because that's how we've always done it. And you have another camp that's very strong and like, never offer, never, no. I get that. I understand what we're trying to take with this chapter is a little bit more nuance to describe the range of situations that occur in real estate and how you can more deftly handle them, and more importantly, explain it to your buyer or your seller and say, look, this is how things work now. It's better when things are grounded in a good explanation of the reality of the transaction. And so that's that. And then we're including, I know I've written a number with the team, a number of scripts to handle different situations. And what's interesting is the number one request we've had now, we've got really good scripts for buyers and sellers. The number one request we've had now is we need scripts to explain this to the agent on the other side of the transaction and to help with that. And that's very interesting, because we can't count on everybody in our industry being up to speed. They're just not going to be to. So maybe that, those of you that run a very professional shop part of what you may need to armor your agents with are some narratives to talk to your cooperating, agent, cooperating broker about how to successfully navigate that transaction. So that's that. So I know we have a comment come in. I know we've just got a few more minutes before we wrap up, but I'm so excited to explore this in a trends report chapter with you, Paul, and to get this into everyone's hands.
Lock it down into a, what's the playbook? What's the operating manual for now as we head into this, navigate this new world of the way the industry is working. I think it's really fascinating. I know all the threads we're pulling are compelling. So you want to give the overview and talk a little bit broader about what else is in the report, or are we wrapping up more?
I think why don't we talk about what's going to be in there? Let's talk about. I'm excited about the report. I want to talk about a few of the things that I know are cooking in the report. I've got one comment. We had a broker commented in who's in Montana that the rule changes that NAR has done is consistent with his state's rules about having a buyer broker agreement or written listing agreement prior to performing services. And I think that's part of what we're seeing is that nationally, because there are different rules, there's many states where it's very informal, where you are presumed to be at some level of agency status. It could be transaction brokerage, it could be whatever, just by being in conversation. There's other states where say, look, you have to sign a disclosure and you need to get an agreement signed. And everywhere in between. And I think that's part of what's made this a challenging topic is everybody has to look at the practices and then interpret them into their state. And there's been some good work done there. We're seeing some of the states have done, some of the state associations are doing strong work in that area. Some more than others. So, but yeah, let's talk about the report. This is our 20th year of the Swanepoel Trends Report. And then why don't we talk about what people are going to get in it? So we've got take us through some of the content for this year.
So we just talked about, winning strategies for what's happening now and the settlement practices that are going into place or the policies. We're evaluating, there's this thinking implicit that the market's finding normal. And we're evaluating some of the key metrics and that we've used to characterize the market and say, we think there's a new normal. And we're going to talk about what that looks like and what maybe that will mean. And we're in a lot of conversations, and Jack, I know this is like 2019. When are we getting back in the buyer and seller?
Right.
We think that there's some fundamental shifts happening, and so we're looking at that. And we're going to present the actual statistics and what we think leaders should be looking at, and how they'll evaluate this going forward. So I'm really excited about that one. This one we're working together on too, Jack. The next one.
The data landscape.
Yeah, which is a really compelling, data is it's becoming even more valuable with the rise of AI because that's the essential fuel that drives AI. And we're coming up with a kind of an organizational structure by which to understand exactly where real estate data fits and the categories and the applications. And it's exciting to kind of tackle and allows leaders to kind of digest and understand more of how to leverage and maybe some of the opportunities that may not be as clear now without an organizing structure.
Well,
so that one's
there's a huge conversation about public and private data, and that again, there's some people talking about things like the clear cooperation policy and maintaining private databases of listings, and what information does the MLS retain, what information do they make public, and not just MLS, but what do brokerages do with their data. So I think the data landscape, as we move to an environment where some players may say, hey, keeping some of my data in-house as a competitive benefit to me, may lead us to interesting situations in the future. And so I think we're going to fully explore that in the chapter. I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
This next one I'm super pumped about, which is the climate. I've wanted to do this one on climate for a while, and now it just seems like we keep hearing about it from all of you out doing the business day to day. I know I've felt it. I felt it when we renewed our office's insurance in California, and we got kicked out of one policy, had to go to another one because of the the fire risk or wildfire risk in California. And I think people in Florida are feeling it. I think I've felt it personally in my home insurance policies have all gone up. because of
And
heat or whatever, right?
that's where the rubber's meeting the road is the insurance policies. But it's also, I mean, like we like to do, we like to zoom out in the trends report. And of course,
Mm.
this is happening slowly. I mean, we can see the impacts, wildfires, sea level rise. Like this is a longer term, but the impacts are real and are definitely they're hitting the ground now with insurance policies rising. And we evaluate a little bit what are the key impacts, and then where's the geography? How's that affect the future geography and maybe a little bit farther out horizon, but like the costs and the difficulty of living in different areas is going to change, is changing. Like even in Phoenix, as we know, it's like to get new housing permits, the water availability is becoming a key limiting factor. This is already driving how housing is evolving in the U.S. And so we provide a lot of insight and data and perspectives. Just you can start getting your head around where potentially things are headed, especially
Yep.
geographically, because that's where to invest and where to grow and where
Yep.
people are moving and where it's easier to live.
Well, and also we have to be able to advise our clients on like, look, your insurance costs, they were here, now they're here. So let's talk about where they're going, because that could affect your affordability into the future. You know, if you get an insurance bill that's 100% up year over year, 2 years from now, you may wish you had bought somewhere else. So, you know, it's a real practical conversation. So,
Yep.
I love this next chapter we're working on. Dan Bro is working with us on it out of the T3 Talent Business Unit. We wrote about it 6 years ago. We talked about
I think it was a decade.
Yeah, it was almost a decade ago. The coming retirement wave in real estate, where a lot of baby boom generation leaders were slowly retiring out. Well, it's in full effect now. We're seeing
Yep.
legacy companies like the Hannas and other large firms that are
T360 itself.
T360 itself went through a leadership transition 2 years ago. So we're seeing, one generation handoff to another. So we're writing a playbook for those leadership transitions and succession
And the different types, whether it's an acquisition, whether it's a generational change, and it's apropos at the time, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So it'll be useful. And this one is it's just diving into the concept of demand generation and taking a more inbound marketing approach, and the opportunity there for brokerages, because leads and business is going to be harder and harder to get, and this is a harder thing to execute, but it's very valuable.
Well, and it does feel like the whole lead generation phenomena with this change in the buyer and buyer broker relationship encapsulated by the settlement provisions is going to create a unique shift where it's like, oh, it may be harder to get a person that you just met on the internet to sign a buyer brokerage agreement with you. I'm already seeing that. It may make those leads not as valuable to a lot of agents who don't know how to convert they already struggle to convert that kind of business, but it'll make it even less. It's like, oh, it's now I have to get them to sign an agreement. I'm really uncomfortable with that. And, we can talk about these touring agreements and all that kind of stuff, but it's sort of the dynamic has changed more in favor of what I think of as traditional demand generation, where you're staying in touch with your database, you're doing marketing of your brokerage, you're doing marketing of your personal brand within markets, and that sort of shift into making that's always been very high ROI. And I like that we've centered that chapter.
It's hard to do, and we're detailing kind of some of the essential components of it and the value of it, because we think it's to your point, potentially even a more valuable strategy to deploy now. So there's pre-orders available now at t3trends.com, and you get pre-order pricing on that. And we're excited to get this to you guys in, I think we're 2 months roughly.
Here's where you go. You go to t3trends.com. Go ahead and reserve your report. Digital report will come out in November. If you want the best thinking for your business for 2025, we're endeavoring to put all that into the report for you. That's what these reports are for. They're for business leaders. They're for people leading companies, sales teams, or just at a very high level practice themselves and want to know what's coming soon. Go ahead and get the report. I would be remiss to not also say you can buy a subscription from us that includes not just this report, and a printed copy, but also all of our prior reports. And there's some great material in there. I know we use it a lot in our consulting work. There's still chapters when we write them, they tend to have a 3 to 4 year lifespan in terms of what's going on. So if you want to get
They're
caught up,
designed that way.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
intentionally that way. So,
And
so
it's
yeah,
designed, I should add, Jack, it's to your point, it's designed to be kind of the bigger strategic thinking for leadership teams to
yeah.
understand what's happening now and where to go, and the information they need to make the decisions to adapt and thrive in the future.
Yep. So go sign up, reserve your copy. We're going to continue this series. We'll be doing additional little chapter discussions about what the research is going to entail and what it's going to be over the coming weeks. So stay tuned into your T360 emails from us. And if you have things that you have questions about or want to know what comes with the report or how it all works, feel free to respond to any of those. Those will come directly to our team, and we're happy to look at those with you. So again, we run our time. Paul, I always appreciate we get to talk about the research that's ongoing, and I know you spend and the research team spends an enormous amount of time putting this report together. So it's great to get to explore it a little bit with you in advance. And then once the report is out, I know we're going to do some in-depth, or there'll be presentations, a lot of material on this that'll be great to also explore. Great.
Thanks, Jack.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Oh, if you ask for scripts, we'll be sending a follow-up with some of the scripts from our workshop. We're happy to supply those. I've got a little slide deck built of those. We'll be sending those out to anybody that attended today. And then if you are part of any of our workshops, you get the full materials. There's everything that you would need to teach your brokerage how to do it. So if you're interested in that, let me know. We are doing some of those on an ongoing basis with our consulting team. So you can bring us in. We can give you a full overview of all the settlement changes and all the practice questions, and you get a full suite of materials that you can bring back to your brokerage to train your agents and design new practices. So look forward to seeing everybody on future calls. Thank you for attending today, and we'll be back in touch. Keep an eye on your email and go pre-order today. Thanks, everyone.